History remembers kings by their crowns and queens by their coronations. It remembers treaties signed in gold ink and wars declared beneath vaulted ceilings. But in the quieter chambers of palaces, beyond the reach of official portraits and parliamentary records, there existed another form of influence, intimate, subtle, and often dismissed with a single word: mistress. Yet to reduce these women to scandal is to misunderstand the architecture of power itself. Across centuries and empires, royal mistresses were not merely romantic diversions. Many were advisors, cultural architects, political intermediaries, and stabilizing forces in monarchies that depended as much on personality as on policy. In Britain at the turn of the 20th century, Alice Keppel stood beside Edward VII, not as a crowned consort but as a calming presence. The Edwardian monarchy operated within constitutional limits, yet its tone and diplomatic style were deeply personal. Edward VII was sociable, temperamental, and politically experienced, yet he relied heavily on emotional equilibrium. Alice offered that equilibrium. Ministers understood her importance. Diplomats recognized her access. She did not issue decrees, but she softened tensions and filtered conversations. In an era when political diplomacy often unfolded during private dinners and country house weekends, the woman seated closest to the king's ear possessed a form of influence no statute could define. Her discretion preserved stability. Her composure reinforced confidence. And in doing so, she shaped the emotional climate of a reign. Travel backward to centuries to France, and influence becomes even more visible. Madame de Pompadour was not simply the mistress of Louis XV. She was a patron of the arts, a political advisor, and a cultural force who helped define the Rococo aesthetic that came to symbolize 18th century France. Born Jean Antoinette Poisson, she rose from bourgeois origins to become one of the most powerful women in Versailles. Unlike many royal companions, Pompadour maintained her influence long after her romantic relationship with the king cooled. She supported philosophers of the Enlightenment, including Voltaire, and influenced appointments within the French court. While critics blamed her for France's military setbacks during the 7 Years' War, her enduring legacy lies in her cultural impact: architecture, painting, decorative arts, shaping French identity itself. She demonstrated that proximity to power could be converted into patronage and policy, even within a rigidly stratified court. In Restoration England, another woman navigated power with audacity rather than subtlety. Barbara Villiers, companion to Charles II, wielded influence openly during a period when the monarchy itself was recovering from civil war and republican rule. Charles II's court was flamboyant, indulgent, and politically delicate. Barbara, created Duchess of Cleveland, received titles, wealth, and authority. She intervened in appointments, secured advancement for allies, and amassed significant political leverage. Her power was controversial, but undeniable. In a monarchy struggling to reassert itself after upheaval, personal alliances carried enormous weight. Barbara's assertiveness reflected a restoration culture, less concerned with discreet morality and more attuned to spectacle and patronage. Her influence demonstrated that royal mistresses could become power brokers in their own right. Further east, in Imperial Russia, influence reached imperial proportions. Before she became empress, Catherine the Great navigated court life initially as a consort and later as a ruler whose personal relationships intertwined with governance. Though she ultimately seized the throne herself, her reign illustrates the blurred line between intimate partnership and political authority. Catherine's favored companions were often elevated to positions of military or administrative importance. In her case, the dynamic inverted: she was sovereign, and her lovers operated within her orbit. Yet the pattern remains consistent. Personal relationships within monarchies often carried political consequence. Affection and ambition were rarely separate. Across Europe, royal courts functioned as ecosystems of loyalty, rivalry, and personal trust. In systems where kings ruled by hereditary right, emotional proximity mattered. Monarchs were human, vulnerable to loneliness, flattery, doubt, and desire. Those who understood them personally could influence their decisions indirectly. A whispered suggestion could redirect a policy. A softened mood could avert a conflict. A well-timed reassurance could restore confidence during diplomatic uncertainty. The power of royal mistresses lay not in formal authority but in access. Access to the monarch's private reflections, fears, and ambitions. This dynamic reveals an important truth about pre-modern governance. Before mass democracy, before bureaucratic insulation, monarchies were deeply personal institutions. Decisions often reflected the temperament of the ruler, and temperament could be shaped by those closest to him. In such environments, the line between personal and political blurred constantly. Royal marriages were frequently diplomatic arrangements, binding nations through lineage rather than love. Emotional companionship often emerged elsewhere. When that companionship endured, it created influence. Yet influence came at a cost. These women were praised in private and condemned in public. They existed in paradox, essential yet unofficial, powerful yet vulnerable. Their reputations could shift overnight with the king's favor. Many navigated hostility from queens, courtiers, and clergy. Their legitimacy depended on discretion, intelligence, and emotional resilience. survival required adaptability. Some, like Alice Keppel, mastered subtlety. Others, like Barbara Villiers, embraced boldness. Pompadour combined cultural patronage with political maneuvering. Each operated within the moral codes of her era. It is tempting to interpret these stories solely through romance or scandal, yet such simplifications erase the structural realities of monarchy. Royal mistresses often emerged because dynastic marriages prioritized alliance over affection. In such systems, companionship sought its own channels. The women who filled those roles sometimes became stabilizers in otherwise volatile courts. Their influence, though unofficial, was woven into governance. Modern audiences, shaped by democratic transparency and media scrutiny, often judge these figures through contemporary standards. But within their historical context, they occupied, recognized, if controversial, positions. Courts developed informal protocols around them. Titles were granted, residences provided, social hierarchies adjusted. Their existence was not secret so much as delicately managed. Power acknowledged them without formalizing them, and in examining their lives a pattern emerges. Influence in monarchies has rarely been confined to crowns alone. Soft power, persuasion, intimacy, emotional intelligence has often shaped outcomes as decisively as legislation. Royal mistresses operated in that realm of soft power. They lacked official titles but possessed insight. They lacked signatures on decrees but shaped conversations that preceded those decrees. Even in the modern era, echoes of this pattern persist. The comparison drawn between Alice Keppel and her great-granddaughter, Camilla Parker Bowles, illustrates how narratives of proximity to power continue to captivate public imagination. Though circumstances differ dramatically in an age of constitutional monarchy and media exposure, the fascination remains rooted in a historical truth. Personal relationships around rulers matter. The story of royal mistresses who influenced history is not merely about romance, it is about access. It is about the human dimension of governance. It is about the recognition that behind every public decision lies a private mind, and behind that private mind may stand someone who listens, advises, steadies, or persuades. These women did not rule kingdoms in their own names, though some came close. They operated in liminal spaces, between legitimacy and exclusion, between affection and ambition. Their power was neither fully acknowledged nor entirely denied, and perhaps that ambiguity is what makes their stories endure. History, when examined closely, is rarely as rigid as its monuments suggest. It is fluid, shaped by conversations in corridors, by confidences exchanged after midnight, by alliances formed not only through treaties but through trust. Royal mistresses inhabited that intimate frontier of influence. Some left architectural legacies, some left political consequences, some left only whispers in archives. But whispers, when repeated across centuries, become echoes. And those echoes remind us that power is never as simple as a crown upon a head. Sometimes it rests in the quiet voice beside it.